Hey, this is Augie, Augie's Locker Room. When you come to the store, you're going to see things that you've probably never seen before unless you've been to a museum. Great items that go back to the Rockney era to the present. Website, augieslockerroom.com. Visit us here or the website.
Tim Prister with Tim O'Malley outside Notre Dame Stadium. Notre Dame just completed their first practice of spring number 2 for Marcus Freeman. And Marcus Freeman addressed the media. Tim, I think the biggest news, we're going to talk about injuries and stuff like that, but the biggest news that I think a lot of people are going to be excited about is that Chris Tyree was lined up with the receivers. He changed numbers. I don't know if that has anything to do with it per se, but he's now number 2, and he was working in the slot, which I think is a good decision in terms of distribution of talent.
It makes too much sense not to do. Chris Tyree has repped as a running back for 3 years. I'm sure he will take 1 or 2 practices this spring to also run some reps with the running back to stay fresh there. But it's the way to use him. You want Chris Tyree on the field. You do not want him on the field over Logan Diggs and Audric Estime. This is the way to do it. Now, I still think as practice goes on, maybe we'll see Lorenzo Styles there. That would be some real competition at slot if you have Tyree and Styles there, because that allows Salerno to be in a blocking role, which is what he probably should be in at this point in his career.
A lot of roster management issues here. We immediately saw some players that had previously been on the roster that we've been speculating about that might not be on the roster, and that includes Philip Riley and Justin Walters from the secondary, Caleb Johnson, offensive tackle, and Josh Bryan, the kicker. And as we found out really after the press conference, Ron Paulus Jr. will be going on a medical scholarship. And so, I know a lot of people have asked questions about him being on scholarship and taking up one of the 85 spots. He will not be moving forward.
And Will Schweitzer, medical disqualification as well. So that goes from 93 to 87. And I thought it was interesting, Marcus Freeman mentioned we are going to use the spring to see, because Justin Walters is a safety. Schuler, Adon Schuler, the freshman, out with recent surgery, Thomas Harper's surgery. So the safety numbers are low. And he said we can use this spring to see if we need a graduate transfer safety, which is something you speculated on our podcast. I think they will find, now that they're down to 87, they will need a graduate transfer safety, because generally these things flush out a little bit. 87 now is not even close to 85 in the end.
Yeah. Tight end numbers are down too, at least in terms of who can participate. Both knee injuries, Kevin Bauman and Eli Raridan are out. Jadarian Price was also with the guys off to the side in what they call the pit. But he is closer to being able to do some things to run around a little bit. So we'll see as it progresses. I was on the offensive side of the ball today in our observations, and man, the freshman receivers look really good. Physically, Jaden Greathouse and Rico Flores Jr. really are put together. Braylon James is not that far along, but you can see he's a really good athlete, and which we knew, of course. But Marcus Freeman said they made some plays today during first practice. We were limited to the first 5 periods, so we didn't see anything live, but they're impressive. I'm not saying that they're going to move ahead of anybody, because there are upperclassmen 6 deep ahead of them, but I thought that they really stood out. Who'd you see on defense?
Well, I just want to piggyback that. That's the health of the program, is that there's 3 freshmen and they don't all have to play. Last year, Tobias Merriweather was a freshman, not here yet in the spring, had to play, didn't, and the wide receiver struggled because of it. Now you actually have a program at wide receiver where if one of those guys breaks in, he really deserves it, because some of the other players developed last season. Defensively, I wanted to see Javonte Jean-Baptiste, obviously, as the transfer, and Thomas Harper. Harper, to my pleasant surprise, was involved, not tackling. When they did tackling drills, even with pads, he took his helmet off. So did Cam Hart, who was involved. They had off-season shoulder surgery. Asked Marcus Freeman about it. They are going to be involved in the spring. Probably don't take contact. Javonte Jean-Baptiste did line up, it seemed, at strong side defensive end. It's hard to tell in the drills, because all they're doing is drilling and repping against air, but he went after Nana Osafa-Mensah, who's obviously a strong side end. So I asked Freeman, do you see Jean-Baptiste as a strong side end right now? Yes, because they want their Vipers to do a little bit more dropping in coverage, which makes sense, especially if you're looking at some 3-man fronts. There's just a little bit more coverage responsibility, and I think that's what's supposed to be part of the Vipers' job description. And just Isaiah Foskey dropping in coverage isn't the same as Isaiah Foskey going after the quarterback, so there wasn't as much of that last year.
They don't drop as much as they once did.
Right. It's not a drop linebacker.
No, it's not. But I do want to talk about the offensive line a little bit. They during the first 5 periods, they did not line up as a first team, second team, third. The days of Brian Kelly where they would start with tempo to start the practice, Marcus Freeman did not do that last year and will not do that moving forward. But I think, based upon the combinations they used, left guard, left tackle, left guard, center, and then the right side of the offensive line. We saw Joe Alt at left tackle. At left guard, the first left guard was Michael Carmody. We'd been speculating about him perhaps moving to guard. At center, of course, Zeke Corral. The right side, Andrew Kristofic is at right guard. And then Blake Fisher at right tackle. And I think you guys probably know who the second teamers are after that. But that's a starting point. And I think that's the starting point that we anticipate, maybe other than Andrew Kristofic being on the right side. That may be a Joe Rudolph preference. Speaking of Joe Rudolph, he was out there for the first time today. Gino Guidugli with the quarterbacks and Marty Biaggi with the special teams.
Veterans most often start practice number 1, practice number 2, practice number 3 in those roles. That's just it's a comfort level for coaches, but also Michael Carmody knows a lot more about the offense than his reserves do. So that's where it starts in the spring. I think if you go back last year, you would see a different starting offensive line at the beginning than at the end as well.
I didn't actually see Josh Lugg, Kyle Hamilton, and Isaiah Foskey, but one of the questions today was about that because we were so focused on, did you see him?
No, but we'll see him Friday. Yeah.
They were out there. I thought it was interesting that those guys are back. Also good to hear Marcus Freeman talk about the defensive linemen, some of those guys being more vocal now. It's great to hear that Riley Mills is more vocal. Nana Safa-Mensah, I don't think it's a real big surprise that he is. Who was the other one that he mentioned as being more vocal? Howard Cross, who's more of a guy that kind of, lets his actions do his talking. But a lot to cover here today. In the first practice, we didn't get to see a whole bunch of it, but that's the start of Irish football spring of 2023, practice number 1 in the books.